In Australia, a mother is desperately trying to trans her kid. In America, a kid is trying desperately to murder President Trump. In Pennsylvania, an arsonist tried to and partially succeeded in burning down the governor's home. And in Oman, the U.S. and Iran are trying their best to avoid imminent war. A violent start to the week. I'm Michael Knowles. This is The Michael Knowles Show. A new report on religion has come out that shows that Catholicism is exploding in Britain. This is it, baby. The arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. The Jacobite Rising is finally here. All these years after 1745, we will get to why Catholicism is on the rise in Britain. First, though, I want to turn to our own country and tell you about Allegiance Flag Supply. Go to showallegiance.com, use promo code Knowles. Are you letting important holidays honoring our service members and their families pass by without displaying your American flag from Allegiance Flag? April 5th was Gold Star Spouses Day. April 23rd is Army Reserve Birthday. And May 1st is Silver Star Banner Day. I love my Allegiance flag. You know, I've got one from my home, front of my house, and then another from my office, and then another from my studio. And then I have a nice little Allegiance American flag keychain that my kids love. I love the American flag, as should you. And this flag is handmade in Charleston, South Carolina. It's not one of those cheap flags that's going to fall apart, made overseas, about to get a lot more expensive. This is a beautiful Allegiance flag, every single part sourced right here in the U.S. It's important to show that you support this country. The libs have been flying that other flag for, that little rainbow flag for some years. Fly the real flag. Right now, go to showallegiance.com. I'm going to make it very easy. Use promo code Knowles. You will get free shipping right now. That is showallegiance.com. Promo code Knowles. Start showing your allegiance to our great and beautiful country. We're going to go around the world in 42 minutes today. There are stories popping off all over the world. I have been traveling like crazy. I just got back from the Premium Cigar Association convention in New Orleans. I survived New Orleans. A few Coca-Colas, one or two cigars, nice big brass bands. It was a good time. But in Australia, there is really, really good news for an issue that we've all been fighting on for a long time. A mother was trying desperately to trans her kid in Australia. The issue went to court, and a judge has ruled. Finally, this might be the first story like this. A judge has ruled against a crazy mother who was trying to trans her poor little kid. The Australian, the newspaper, reports that Justice Andrew Strum awarded sole custody of a 12-year-old boy to the boy's father who opposed the boy's mother who was trying to turn the 12-year-old boy into a 12-year-old girl. This is a pretty lengthy judgment, a 58,000-word judgment that looked into the gender clinic that was involved in attempting to trans this kid. And they found that the clinic had not formally diagnosed the little 12-year-old boy with gender dysphoria until the court case began. So they were starting to trans the kid. They never even diagnosed him with gender dysphoria. And the judge determined that the boy did not have gender dysphoria. He just had a crazy mother living in a crazy culture. According to the Australian, quote, the judge accepted evidence that the gender clinic has an ideological commitment to the medicalized gender-affirming model. So that the mother takes this poor little boy to the gender clinic. But the gender clinic is not a serious medical institution because the gender clinic never rules that a child does not have gender dysphoria. The gender clinic is just an ideological, what do you call it, conversion therapy factory that just takes in poor little kids who have lunatic parents and tries to chop them up and make them look like the opposite sex. According to the judge, quote, no alternative treatment options are offered by the clinic for gender dysphoria diagnosis there other than prescription of puberty blockers by a pediatrician. A doctor whose diagnosis of the boy was in dispute, quote, could not identify a single case of a child who had been referred by her or one of her colleagues to a pediatrician at that clinic who had not been prescribed puberty blockers. That's got to raise your eyebrow. Even if you believe in transgenderism or whatever other nonsense, it's got to raise your eyebrow that 100% of cases referred to this clinic result in puberty blockers and a de facto diagnosis of gender dysphoria and transing the kids. That there's no way, there is nothing in medicine that comes out with a 100% rate. So this is great news for this poor little kid. Great news for the fight to eradicate transgenderism from public life entirely. However, we got to remember something here. One of the big political wins out of this case is it shows that empathy arguments can cut both ways. Because so often you hear the empathy argument from people on the left, from the pro-trans side. It says, what about the poor LGBT youth? You know, we need to support trans kids. Trans kids are being persecuted by this administration, by the global conservatives who are oppressing them, forcing them into the closet, not allowing them to be their true selves. This is the argument you hear all the time. Remember that lunatic fake bishop lady who was scolding President Trump after his inauguration? The bishopress said, trans kids are afraid, Mr. President. So that's an empathy argument. But likewise, you can make an empathy argument here. Say, look, we've heard from medical doctors, we've heard from judges, we've heard from serious people. This boy does not think he's the opposite sex. He does not have gender dysphoria. This boy is the victim of a lunatic mother who I guess wanted a daughter or something like that. And so she's willing to ruin this boy's life, probably lead him to an early grave, statistically speaking, just to chop the poor kid up and make him look like a little girl. We need to protect this poor little boy from his lunatic mother. And in this case, that did happen because the boy was given to the father. The father now has sole custody. But the political lesson for us, I think, is because the empathy arguments can cut both ways, the reliable mechanism for adjudicating policy is to pick the policy that is in line with the truth. What the left tells us is, yeah, look, even if a man can't really be a woman, even if this isn't true, it's just, if we just lie to everybody, fewer people will kill themselves, which isn't even true, by the way. According to this social scientific data, the transing doesn't actually reduce suicide rates. But that's their argument. They say, look, even if it's not true, you have to let the man into the woman's bathroom out of empathy. But you can make an empathy argument both ways. When it comes to the bathrooms, you make an empathy argument for the women. You say, well, the poor women, maybe some of whom are victims of sexual crimes, they don't want to have to share a bathroom with some husky dude. So if the empathy argument cuts both ways, the only reliable guide is going to be the truth. And I think this story is the first of many. The judge in this case cited the Cass review that came out of the UK, which showed that the gender-affirming surgeries, which are really gender-denying surgeries, are just absolutely dreadful, not based on any scientific reality. This is the first of many, and I hope we hold on to that political lesson. We like to have compassion, we like empathy and sympathy and all of this, but the truth comes first. Now, speaking of kids and their parents, a less happy story. A Wisconsin teenage boy, a 17-year-old boy, allegedly murdered his parents. Try to follow this. 17-year-old boy allegedly murdered his parents in order to gain an inheritance so that he could fund his own campaign to assassinate President Trump in order to save the white race. Did you follow that? It took me one or two times to really get all the details here. According to the FBI, he was in pursuit of, quote, the financial means and autonomy to assassinate President Trump. Court documents show that the 17-year-old kid was allegedly part of a satanic cult. It had a strong anti-Judaism and anti-Christian and anti-Western ideology. That's according to WISN. The kid left a manifesto. According to the manifesto, he wrote, as to why specifically Trump has to be assassinated, I think it's pretty obvious. By getting rid of the president and perhaps the vice president, that is guaranteed to bring in some chaos. And then when you read further in the reporting, the headline says he murdered his parents. When you read further in, you see he murdered his mother and his stepfather, so not his biological father. And people are all going to try to point to a political motive here. The fact that he was trying to murder Trump, it's a pretty clear political motive. But he also might just be a total nut kid, and maybe he's got daddy issues. Who knows? In any case, really, really awful story. Obviously, you should pray for the murdered parents and for everyone involved, and for President Trump, who's survived a lot of assassination attempts. The key to this story for me is that one word: autonomy. You see that? He wanted the financial means and autonomy, according to the FBI, to assassinate Trump, inaugurate a race war, and then save the white race thereby. This is a reminder to me, and I think hopefully to all conservatives. Radicalism is bad. All radicalism is bad. Radicalism from the word radix, which means the root, to pull up by the root. It's bad. It just doesn't work out very well. I'm not a radical. I'm not a revolutionary. I am a conservative. I'm a traditionalist. I'm a normal guy. It's good to be all of those things. I was at a beautiful Mass, Palm Sunday Mass yesterday. It was the longest liturgy of the year in the Catholic Church. And I was in New Orleans at this beautiful, beautiful church. Oldest church in New Orleans. And as I'm examining my conscience before I go into confession, I noticed something in the examination of conscience where you're just going through, okay, did I violate the first commandment, the second commandment, third, fourth commandment? Maybe we have to respect our parents. There is a question that comes up. It's, have you had a disordered desire for autonomy? And that question is so jarring in our modern age. What do you mean? Autonomy is great. That's the greatest thing we could possibly have. That's what all of liberalism tends toward. What do you mean a disordered desire for autonomy? Well, that could be a violation of the commandment to honor your father and mother, because we're not totally autonomous creatures. We have responsibilities. We're born into a family. We're not born as individuals. We're born into a family from our parents, and we owe our parents something as a result, and we owe our whole community something in an extended understanding of the family. This kid obviously had a rather disordered desire for autonomy, the autonomy from his parents and a political autonomy, which brought me back then, speaking of the Catholics, to Thomas Aquinas on revolution. Not in the Summa Theologiae, but in De Regno, on kingship, book 1, chapter 7, where Thomas takes on this question of whether or not we have a right to revolution. Do we, especially this is very important for us Americans because America was founded in a revolution. Do Christians actually see a right to revolution? We'll get to that in 1 second. First, I want to tell you about Stopbox USA. Go to stopboxusa.com, use promo code Knowles. Current handgun storage options are like choosing between two flavors of terrible. Either your weapon is locked up tight, well, that's great, totally safe and tight, locked away, and totally useless in an actual emergency, or it's sitting around like an accident waiting to happen. Enter Stopbox USA, which realized that choosing between safe but inaccessible and accessible but dangerous was a false dichotomy. Their solution? The Stopbox Pro. I have had my Stopbox Pro for 6 months now, maybe more like 8 months now, and it's phenomenal. The thing I love about it is locks your gun up nice and tight, but it's analog. Okay, it's old school. It uses your fingers for a code, doesn't rely on faulty electronics. You know, all those fancy electronic locks, you're just waiting for them to die when you need them most. This thing is 100% mechanical, no batteries, no problems, while the rest of the world is making smart devices that are actually very stupid. Stopbox went old school, reliable. Quick access when seconds matter, secure when they don't, zero dependence on electricity. This is my kind of technology. Right now, for a limited time, our listeners are getting a great deal. Not only do you get 10% off your whole order when you use code Knowles at stopboxusa.com, they're also giving you buy one, get one free for their Stopbox Pro. That's 10% off and a free Stopbox Pro when you use code Knowles at stopboxusa.com. Discover a better way to balance security and readiness with Stopbox. Do we have a right to revolution? This 17-year-old lunatic kid wanted a revolution from a race war, from killing his parents, and from killing Trump to save the white race. I don't know. That's one particular kind of revolution, but let's just zoom it out. Do we have a right to revolution, period? Here's what St. Thomas says. Should private persons attempt on their own private presumption to kill the rulers, even though tyrants, assuming the rulers are tyrants already, This would be dangerous for the multitude as well as for their rulers. This is because the wicked usually expose themselves to dangers of this kind more than the good. For the rule of a king, no less than that of a tyrant, is burdensome to them since, according to the words of Solomon, a wise king scatters the wicked. Consequently, by presumption of this kind, to kill the king, to kill the supposed tyrant, danger to the people from the loss of a good king would be more probable than relief through the removal of a tyrant. Furthermore, he writes, it seems that to proceed against the cruelty of tyrants is an action to be undertaken not through the private presumption of a few, but rather by public authority. So what Thomas is saying here is, yeah, you hate the authority above you. You hate your dad. You hate your boss. You hate the mayor. You hate the president. You hate even if you like the president, but you hate the political order. You want to get rid of the political order. You want to start chaos, and you want to have a revolution. Well, actually, the good that you're going to lose is almost always going to outweigh the good that you could gain. So it's going to be more bad than good, and you probably just shouldn't do it. But if in a certain case you actually are justified in removing the king or the president or the ruler, the civil authority, that should not just come from a private action. That has to come in an orderly way. It has to come from public authority, which is why, actually, there is a conservative argument for the American Revolution. Because there were some real scoundrels and private citizens and lunatics and terrorists who were involved in the American Revolution. But by and large, it was conducted by people that had been invested with public authority in a relatively orderly way. That's the conservative argument for it. It's not that we don't believe ever in changing the political regime or even in revolution. But what the libs want to do is just get all of these complete lunatics, people through their own private judgment on the streets, to go murder the king, to go murder Trump. There was a survey that came out a week or two ago, 55% of Democrats, of leftists, think that it would be justified to assassinate President Trump. That's bad. All radicalism is bad. I don't care if it pops up. It's usually on the left, but even on the supposed right, it's just bad. And I'm not just wagging my finger and scolding. It's bad and you can deduce its badness from natural philosophy, from human nature, and certainly from religion. Speaking of this radicalism and political violence, the Pennsylvania governor just had a decent chunk of his house burned to the ground because of an arsonist. This is a suspected arson attack. The attack was targeted, obviously, at the governor. It's hard to accidentally burn down the governor's mansion. Oh, darn, I meant to get the house next door. It was conducted through homemade incendiary devices. I'm somewhat familiar with this because Antifa leftist terrorists threw an incendiary device at a speech when I was giving a speech at UPitt a couple years ago. And now that the suspected arsonist, we don't really know his political motives for sure. He might have just been a total lunatic. He was due in court a couple days after this attack on the governor's mansion because of a 2023 assault charge. So he just might be a lunatic criminal who wants to watch the world burn. In any case, it was a serious attack. And right afterward, what you saw was conservatives and Republicans coming out and condemning the violence. J.D. Vance comes out, he says, thanks be to God that Governor Shapiro and his family were unharmed in this attack. Really disgusting violence, and I hope whoever did it is brought swiftly to justice. Pam Bondi came out right away. The attorney general said basically the same thing. A lot of conservatives and Republicans. So it's unclear, why was the Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro, targeted? Is it because he was a Democrat and it was some Republican who targeted him? I guess it could be. Was it because he's a Jew? That's probably the reason that Josh Shapiro was not picked by Kamala Harris to be her running mate, because the base of the Democrat Party now hates the Jews, and he was a Jew. And even though Pennsylvania is an important must-win state, that was too much for the Democrat base. Could be. I mean, I think the bombing occurred on Passover, so a very important holiday for the Jews. Could be because the arsonist is just crazy, and sometimes people don't have a motive. They're certainly not a rational one. That we can't really know right now. All we can know is how the Republicans are responding. In this case, the Republicans are responding uniformly by saying, this was terrible. We condemn the violence. I hope this lunatic is brought to justice. Really, really terrible stuff. What happened when President Trump was almost murdered? You had some Democrats condemn it, and you had some Democrats say, darn, so close. Ah, boy, darn. And I'm not I don't think I'm being unfair or attacking straw men here. 1 week ago, a public opinion survey showed that the majority of Democrats think that murdering President Trump would be justified. And it wasn't all that close. 55% of Democrats said it would be justified. Around 50% said it would be justified to kill Elon Musk. Okay? That's my takeaway from this. There will be some, I just gave a long speech on political violence at the University of Pittsburgh, which you can catch on my YouTube channel, I think, and on the YAF YouTube channel. But my takeaway was not that there's never any political violence from the right. There is sometimes on the extreme right. It's usually on the left, but sometimes on the right. And the political violence actually comes from the ideology of the left and this maximizing of autonomy, the kind that you see in the manifesto of that 17-year-old lunatic who wanted to murder Trump. But it does sometimes happen on the right, and yet you're never going to see a right-winger, a mainstream Republican defending the Oklahoma City bombing. You will, however, see mainstream left-wingers defend BLM, torching cities, murdering dozens of people. You will find mainstream Democrats justifying the assassination of President Trump. That's the big takeaway to me. Now, speaking of the Jews, the Associated Press is reporting, pressed for evidence against Mahmoud Khalil. He's that former Columbia graduate student who was creating ruckus, engaging in a lot of pro-Palestine kind of public demonstration, harassing Jews, or at least leading people who harass Jews. The government cites its power to deport people for beliefs. So this is supposed to be a big scare headline. Oh, wow. The government was asked why they're deporting this poor Mahmoud Khalil, and the government says that it has the power to deport people for beliefs, which obviously it does. Rubio doubled down on this. He said, condoning anti-Semitic conduct and disruptive protests in the United States would severely undermine that significant foreign policy objective. Now you have even civil libertarians weighing in. Bill Maher, as pro-free speech supposedly as it could be, weighs in. Is it okay to deport Mahmoud Khalil from America for opposing Israel, supporting Palestine, such as it is, for his protest? Is that American?
I'm okay with that.
All right, what if I was a young student at Columbia, they're on a green card, British, come in, happy to be here, do all my paperwork, get to Columbia, and I start leading a group which is a bunch of white supremacists, and we start terrorizing black students in the way that they were terrorizing Jewish students. Well, hang on. In that circumstance, would we all be as comfortable with this, or is it the reality which was exposed by the mobs at Columbia, which is that for some reason Jews get treated differently to anybody else when it comes to this kind of thing? Because if that had been, honestly,
Correct.
white supremacists treating black students like that, they would be out the country in 10 minutes.
I really should have said Piers Morgan weighs in, because all you get from Bill Maher is the correct. But hear that. You get the correct. From Bill Maher, the pro-free speech guy, the civil libertarian, he's agreeing with Piers Morgan here. He says, no, correct, you're right. If this were a white supremacist kid who was here on a foreign visa, he would have been deported in 2 seconds. So why is the anti-Semitic guy or the anti-Israel guy, why is it a different standard for him to be deported? And I think they're basically right. There aren't that many people here on foreign visas who are white supremacists. It's just generally not how it works. But sure, I'm glad people are coming to grips with this. We should be able to deport people over their beliefs if their beliefs are anti-American. I'm not saying we deport citizens. I'm saying we deport foreigners. They have no particular right to be here. And if they're not helping the country, and if their views are contrary to the commonly held views of the country, then boot them out if it really reaches a point of social disruption. However, and Bill Maher's right and Piers Morgan's right here too. However, they're missing one thing. We would never deport people. We would never deport foreigners who are here on visas for attacking white people. We would never deport foreigners here on visas for attacking Christians. We wouldn't do it. We are now maybe going to deport this guy because he doesn't like the Jews. We certainly would deport someone if he didn't like black people or Hispanic people or who are a white supremacist. But for a fact, please prove me wrong. We would never deport anyone for leading protests against white people or Western civilization, that awful colonial white Western civilization. We would never. In fact, the students who are here on the foreign visas are here to study why white people are evil and why Western civilization is terrible and why Christianity is wrong and oppressive and terrible. We bring people into the country for that kind of activism. So this is really just my request. Deport Khalil because he doesn't like the Jews and he's pro-Hamas or whatever. Fine, good. I don't want that guy in my country. What good does he bring to my country? I don't want that guy here. And yes, deport the skinhead, so the mythical skinhead who comes here on a foreign visa. Sure, deport him. That's fine. But when are we going to start deporting the people who are generating hatred against white people and against Christians? Let's deport those people too. There are plenty of them. I'm not saying American citizens. We'll get to that later. I'm not saying they wouldn't deserve it. But no, we're not talking about deporting citizens. We're talking about these foreigners who are coming here, who have no right to be here. When are you going to deport them? Because until you also go after those people, it just feels like the enforcement of these standards and norms is totally unbalanced. Now, when you want to be balanced, standing on your own 2 feet, you got to check out Tecovas. Go to tecovas.com/Knowles. You know what they say? Anywhere worth going is worth going in good boots. Find your perfect pair with Tecovas. They're not just any boots. They're a testament to craftsmanship that speaks to both generational ranchers and first-time boot enthusiasts alike. I'm sure you've heard of Tecovas, not only on this show, but just generally. Since they were founded in Texas in 2015, they totally exploded. Each pair of Tecovas undergoes over 200 meticulous steps in their handcrafting process. It's really, really great. But if you're like me, and you're not exactly a cowboy, okay? Then I got even better news for you. Look, I have a pair of Tecovas boots. I love it. I wear them at least 1 or 2 times every year, even though I can't really pull off cowboy boots. You know what I can pull off? The Monterey shoes in Midnight Bison. I got these shoes. They're extremely comfortable. But I'll tell you, I've got a lot of nice pairs of shoes. I don't think I've ever gotten more compliments on a shoe than I have on these Monterey Bison shoes. And they're a great price, beautifully comfortable, really well made. And right now you can get 10% off at tecovas.com/Knowles when you sign up for email and texts. That's 10% off at tecovas.com/Knowles, tecovas.com/Knowles. See site for details. Tecovas, point your toes west. Speaking of the youths and religion, great news coming out of Britain. Really kind of surprising news too, at least to some people. Young Brits are becoming Catholic. Weren't there some wars fought in Britain over Catholicism? Didn't the Catholics lose, actually? Didn't a lot of people die because of this? And Britain is probably the Protestant country par excellence because Henry VIII solidifies the Protestant Revolution. How are they becoming Catholic? This is according to a study from the Bible Society, published this week. Anglicans have been overtaken. The Catholics now outnumber the Anglicans in England by more than 2-to-1 among Zoomers and young millennials. This according to reporting from the Telegraph. This Easter, thousands of people are going to be received into the Catholic Church, and substantial numbers of them are under the age of 35. So notice, the Catholics aren't exploding well, they used to explode because of like Guy Fawkes and stuff and, the wars of religion, but now exploding in terms of numbers and enthusiasm. They're not just growing in England because parents are sending their kids to Catholic school. They're not just growing in England because Catholics tend to have a lot of children. They're growing because of conversions too. A lot of people are going to be received into the Catholic Church this Easter, on this coming Sunday. Archbishop Mark O'Toole of Cardiff says, when you meet them and hear their stories, they say they are looking for clarity and stability. They are attracted to the Catholic Church's strong sense of identity and clarity around the teachings of Jesus. I'm not surprised by this really at all, in part because I'm an American and I have read some of my Alexis de Tocqueville. Tocqueville predicted for America. He says, even though America seems like it's a Protestant country, over time, the religion of America is unstable and it's going to tend toward either Catholicism or atheism. And I think you're actually seeing that play out in America too, but you're seeing the same thing in Britain right now. Any return in the West to religion is going to tend toward Catholicism. I think that's in part, I being Catholic, think that's in part because Catholicism is true. And I think that the faith will endure until the end of the age. But even if you don't really believe yet, or you have some faith, but you're not Catholic or whatever, one of the reasons you might agree with my assessment as well is because Catholicism has endured, the Catholic Church, love it or hate it, has endured from antiquity. It's the only institution in the West that has endured since antiquity. And so for younger people who want clarity, who want stability, who are considering these eternal questions for the first time after decades of imposed ignorance and glibness and shallowness, they are probably going to tend toward the most enduring, stable, sturdy kinds of religion in the West. And that really comes down to one, and that's Catholicism. This is really no knock on my Methodist friends, say, but there will not be a civilization-wide Methodist revival, and that is what's going to bring everyone. It's just not going. It's not going to happen. Okay, it's not to say that people won't return to some degree to the mainline Protestant churches or to the evangelical Protestant churches or anything like that. It's just to say, if you're really looking to return, all caps with a V instead of a U, return to tradition, return to our civilization, you're likely going to see people tending toward the ancient, enduring church with the smells and the bells. Because if one of the marks of modernity is disenchantment, a kind of a lowering of our expectations, a lowering of our ideals, a lowering of our sense of ourselves. And now we think we're just kind of meat puppets to feel pleasure until we turn to worm food and take a dirt nap, rather than as real spirits and bodies, together, but with an eternal destiny. Then you're going to want a religion that still has enchantment, smells and bells, for instance. If the mark of modernity is private judgment, maximizing autonomy, as that lunatic kid who wanted to kill Trump said. It's all about just the individual and his own base quotidian appetites. And you're reacting against that, as I think many people are, then you're going to tend toward the religion, that the sole religion in the West that is not based on private judgment. Even Anglicanism, which has a lot of liturgy and a fair bit of tradition to it and all the rest, it's still grounded on private judgment. At the very least, the private judgment of the King of England, and the other varieties of religion that flow from that are more and more grounded on private judgment. But what people are reacting against is the tyranny of subjectivism that has come from the exaltation of private judgment and the idolatry of individual autonomy. That's why this is happening. And it's why it's happening even in the home of Anglicanism and maybe one of the chief political fonts of Protestantism. It doesn't seem to make sense on the surface, but this has been brewing for a long, long time. It's people reacting against what they see as this just kind of stew of uncertainty and individual caprice. They want something that's sturdy and solid, and sometimes you just want to be told the answer. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel every single morning. That's why I'm not surprised at all. Having gone to some nice churches in the UK, not surprised at all. The Anglicans got all the really, really nice old churches, but who knows? Maybe we'll all come back together. And by the end, I think the whole church will come back together, won't we? If you're not a Daily Wire subscriber, you're missing out on the full, ad-free, unfiltered, uncensored shows from the most trusted voices and the most handsome voices, I would say, in conservative media. You get live chat during the show where you can talk with us and thousands of fans just like you across the country. And if you're an all-access member, you get extended episodes and exclusive Q&As with Daily Wire hosts. This is how we fight back. This is how we win. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Do it right now. My favorite comment yesterday is from Fourths Man 64. And this is actually this is providential because it's about the English right after I talk about the English. Englishman here, thank you so much for your use of the word ruffians. Made my day. I'm glad you liked that. I was speaking to a British friend of mine, an English friend of mine the other day, And he texted me. He says, at the end of the text, he says, Michael, as we say in England, inshallah. And so you're right. The English idioms are changing as a result of mass migration, among other things. Speaking of the changing times, this is going to be my most controversial take of many months, but it's urgent now because there is a bipartisan group of senators with the backing of President Trump who want to end daylight savings time. And I don't like this. I am a big supporter of daylight savings time, and I'm not just saying that to be contrarian or anything. I really like daylight savings time. I really think it is a mistake to end daylight savings time. When all the senators get together across both parties and they all agree on something, that thing is going to be terrible. And in this case, what they want to do is lock the clock. And why? Because every person who's never given 1 second's thought to daylight savings time and has just scrolled through Twitter and heard something, they'll say, actually, daylight savings time is really bad because people die every year. Did you know that? It increases deaths every year. And you say, oh, really? How's that? Because I saw a tweet about that one time, and it increases deaths because people have to wake up a little earlier or whatever. So they say people have heart attacks or something. So it's I would say, a negligible uptick in deaths. I think a little bit of a statistically dubious observation. But what that ignores is all the benefits that you get from daylight savings time. Well, I guess the question you have to ask yourself, which really gets down to a difference between the left and the right here, is why do we have daylight savings time in the first place? Before we go and tear down Chesterton's fence, how about we ask, why is that fence up in the first place? And most people will say, well, because of farming. It used to be when a lot of people were farmers that having that extra daylight was really helpful. But, now most people don't really farm, so it's not a big deal. Well, okay, what are the other benefits of daylight savings time? Daylight savings time extends daylight in the warmer months when you want to be outside playing around and doing stuff. You don't need that extra daylight in the winter months when you don't want to be outside really much anyway. According to the Department of Energy, daylight savings time reduces energy usage and energy costs. Not by a ton, but by 0.5%. It's pretty good, and you consider all the energy of the United States, it's pretty good. There is evidence that daylight savings time not only kills people, like the libs argue, but actually reduces deaths too, because it reduces car crashes. That's from a study back in 1995. It also saves property and might save people's lives because daylight savings time reduces street crime pretty significantly. Robberies, for instance, dropped 27% during the sunset hours during daylight savings time. That's according to a more recent study from 2015. Daylight savings time increases economic activity because you can go out, you're more inclined to go shopping, you're more inclined to work a little bit. It increases economic activity both domestically and internationally because other countries use daylight savings time too. And then I want to get to my most basic argument for daylight savings time. It's a tradition. It's a kind of fun tradition. It's a tradition that recognizes in a particularly pronounced way the changing of the seasons, the movement of time, the variety of life. It's kind of like fun and kooky. People will say, well, we shouldn't have to change our clocks twice a year. What a hassle. It's not efficient. Life is about more than efficiency, my friends. Our modern clinical robotic culture just wants to maximize efficiency in everything. I am a conservative. I don't want to maximize efficiency in everything. I like to enjoy fun, quirky little things. I enjoy our culture, okay? And that's a fun little cultural habit. It actually does produce economic and health benefits as well. But it kind of makes sense. And we've forgotten why we had daylight savings time in the first place. And like so many levelers and radicals, when we forget why a tradition exists, we just want to get rid of it. We don't ask ourselves, why did that tradition arise in the first place? Why have we maintained that tradition? Have we ever tried to get rid of the tradition? How has it worked out? It just seems like there's a mass psychosis that's going on that convinces everyone that we've been wrong for so many decades now. So many, many years. It was all just bogus and stupid. No. I'm pro daylight savings time. You should be too. Call your congressman. It's probably not the top issue on your list. But Sarah, I actually think it speaks to broader issues and a broader political outlook. Now, speaking of Trump initiatives, big news on the trade war front. President Trump has just exempted Apple from tariffs. This is huge, absolutely huge. Liberation Day, Trump says we're going to have blanket tariffs on the entire world, including uninhabited islands. And there's going to be a baseline of 10%, and then it's going to go up on most countries, and it's going to go really far up on countries like China. Then Trump pauses most of the tariffs for most countries. Then everyone says, all right, the trade war is really just about China. But then Trump exempts one of the biggest products that we get from China, namely iPhones, smartphones. Code 8517130000 of this tariff policy adds smartphones to the list of exemptions from the 125% China tariff, alongside other electronic devices and components, semiconductors, solar cells, and memory cards. Now this means, you know my thesis on the tariffs. My thesis on the tariffs is anyone who says that he knows what the tariffs are about is totally deluded or lying to you. I don't care if they're pro-tariff. I don't care if they're anti-tariff. I don't care if they love Trump. I don't care if they hate Trump. Anyone who says to you, oh, I know, hey, let me tell you what the tariffs are really about, is wrong. And you shouldn't trust that person. And they're saying it because pundits just have to pretend to be certain about everything, and they can be frequently wrong but never in doubt. But I am telling you the truth, which is that not one person on this earth, with the possible exception of President Trump, knows what these tariffs are about. Because, as you know, President Trump, one of his great political gifts is unpredictability. Top cabinet officials do not know what these tariffs are about. And if you pretend to, you're going to look like a fool. Because the minute you say, okay, the tariffs aren't really about the whole, for a while they're saying it's all about the whole world and we're going to totally rewrite the trade regime and this is reorienting the economy. And then when Trump pauses the tariffs on the whole world, they say, well, no, it actually wasn't about that. Forget about that. We were just bluffing. It's about China. It's all about China. But okay, if you exempt China, if you exempt the most important product that we get from China from the tariffs, then what are you really even levying a serious tariff on China? What is it? I'm not trying to read President Trump's mind. Good luck. Good luck with that. He's the most impressive politician of our lifetimes. You're not going to read his mind. What this shows you, what we can deduce from the tariffs and from this exemption, is just how reliant we are on China. Trump has to exempt the iPhone because we would be nationally crippled if we tariffed the smartphones coming out of China. We are just too reliant on China, not only for cheap plastic tchotchkes, not only for cheap t-shirts or whatever, but for the devices that are probably the most important technical tool we use in our lives, every single American. The pauses, the holdups, the hiccups on the tariffs and the trade war, the threats to the bond market even, that expose a major U.S. vulnerability in the trade war, that President Trump acknowledged. He said, all right, I'm pausing it in part because people were getting queasy about the bond market. China owns $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury securities. What all of this is showing me is a really important political lesson, which is we are simply too dependent on China. So whether you love tariffs or hate tariffs or love Trump or hate Trump, whatever, any reasonable person has to conclude we must change our trade practices with China and our investment practices with China, because China can poke so many pressure points on the United States that no matter what policy we want to pursue, we are going to be backed into a corner. We have to decouple. Now, speaking of our cell phones, speaking of doom scrolling on our cell phones and just general isolation, my friend Sour Patch Lids. Do you know Sour Patch Lids? It used to be on Tim Pool's show, and now you probably know her from Twitter. She made a really, really great point about men and men's spaces and men's alienation and isolation, but we don't have time to get to it. I really do want to get to it. So we're going to get to it tomorrow. How do you like that tease? Because today is Music Monday. The rest of the show continues now. You do not want to miss it. Become a member. Use code Knowles, KNWLES at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans.